This video is sponsored by Only Crits. This year, I'm doing a series of videos talking about the many ways you can structure your D&D campaigns. We're especially looking at TV shows as really good examples of different approaches for structuring your games. And of course, one challenge we often have to face as game masters is how to make our D&D campaign feel like a cohesive story. And there are lots of different ways to accomplish that, and we're going to talk about a bunch of them across the course of this series. But one method is just to run a completely episodic adventure where there is no connective tissue between the different sessions, but you link them all with some little references to something bigger you're cooking up. You start teasing where all of this is going.
The big bad wolf.
The hours I've sat here, days and weeks and months, all on my own.
Attention all personnel. Bad Wolf 1 descending. Bad Wolf 1 descending.
And over on the Bad Wolf channel, the face of Bo has just announced he's pregnant.
Blythe Thrug.
What's it mean?
Bad Wolf.
In every season of the 2005 reboot of Doctor Who, at least for the first several years, there would be some sort of word or phrase that would repeat in almost every episode of the season. In Season 1, we saw or heard the phrase Bad Wolf repeated a bunch of times. In Season 2, it was the word Torchwood. In Season 3, it was Mr. Saxon, as well as another clue that we'll talk about later. In Season 4, there were a bunch of them, including planets vanishing and the bees disappearing. And in the final few specials of 2009, it was the phrase, "He will knock 4 times." And all these are designed to foreshadow what was going to happen in the season finale of the respective seasons. So today we're going to look at these seasons and see how these little clues can act as a very simple way to make a story feel more cohesive. And we're just talking about the first era run by Russell T Davies, so seasons 1 through 4, and the 2009 specials, culminating with The End of Time, Part 2. And we are going to discuss these with some spoilers, so if you haven't watched any of these episodes, go check them out. It's a really good show. Now, we're not talking about the Stephen Moffat era or anything else that came after that, because while those episodes also have season-long plots foreshadowed by some of these sorts of clues, those seasons are structured completely differently, so we're going to have to tackle that in a separate video. Also, just to be clear, I'm calling each year's worth of stories a season, even though the show refers to each season as a series, because it's British. But that's because when I talk about the season finale of each season, I don't want to call them a series finale, because that sounds like the end of the show overall, and we're not talking about the end of the show, just the end of each year's worth of stories. Basically, we're talking about one arc of your campaign, not necessarily the entirety of your overall campaign, and I think calling it a series finale would just be confusing for that reason. If you like what you see here, make sure to like and subscribe, and consider signing up for my Patreon. The last video I did in this series got copyright claimed, and I know the BBC also has a habit of doing that, so this video might wind up getting demonetized again. And if that's the case, then consider throwing me a few dollars on Patreon. That really goes a long way. Honestly, even just $1 a month helps a lot more than you might think. Now, without further ado, let's dig into these season-long clues. Although, let's actually start with that word, clues, because even that is kind of the wrong word, because a clue implies a mystery, and a mystery should be something the audience can potentially solve. But these, they don't give you nearly enough information to predict anything. When you see Bad Wolf written on the side of the TARDIS, there's nobody in the audience who thinks, aha, I see where this is going. Rose is going to become a time god. Now, that doesn't mean nobody could have predicted any of these season finales. I think you could argue that seasons 3 and 4 gave you a lot more to work with. But these are all literally just a word or two. Bad Wolf, Torchwood, Mr. Saxon. From these references, you might be able to figure out that there's going to be a big bad at the end of the season, but that's it. But also, that's enough, at least for this approach. Council of Geeks made a great video about why she's gotten tired of this storytelling format on these shows, because she feels this mystery box method is just so played out and tired after so many seasons of doing it exactly the same way. And that's 100% valid, especially if they all repeat the exact same format, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I actually think the term mystery box that she uses is a little bit misleading. I don't think she's wrong to use it. A mystery box is a piece of fiction structured around a mystery, but thus murder mystery and more conspiracy. It's less about finding the killer and more about finding the mythos that connects everything. But aside from the fact that the term mystery box has gotten some justifiably bad press after J.J. Abrams abused the storytelling method to fuck up Star Wars, in this case, it's also misleading because, well, we're not actually asking our players to solve this mystery. We're barely even asking them to speculate on it. Because when all they hear is Mr. Saxon, they don't have enough information to figure out that this is secretly the Master returned to life. They might guess that, but there'd be absolutely no clues to support it. It would literally just be a guess. So I think using any term with the word mystery in it is kind of misleading and will literally get us into the wrong headspace when we're trying to figure out how to deploy these sorts of themes in our games. These are just words that get repeated frequently. They're ominous, significant mentions of something that might otherwise seem innocuous. Now, I want to be clear, sometimes throughout this video, I'm still going to call them clues, because if I call them ominous mentions every time, that's just a mouthful. I've got to mix it up a little bit, and a clue is at least close to the right term. Even though, yeah, I mean, they're not really clues because they often don't contain any new or distinct information. Because ultimately, when an audience member or a player hears one of these ominous mentions of Bad Wolf or Torchwood or bees, we're not asking them to solve a mystery. We're not even asking them to speculate, although the speculation can just be a lot of fun. We're literally just asking them to trust us. These ominous mentions are just a form of foreshadowing, and it's a promise to the audience, and your players, that you do have a plan, that they're not just going to be wasting their time and energy by going on random adventures, and at the end of the day, they'll have nothing to show for it. It's a promise that all of this is leading somewhere. However, unlike a lot of other storytelling structures we're going to discuss throughout this year, the ominous mentions still leave the GM with a ton of freedom when it comes to the individual adventures that make up a campaign. Because especially in the first Russell T Davies era, these little clues were literally just an overheard word or a sight gag in an otherwise completely unrelated episode. These ominous mentions don't usually affect the story in any way, which is great for game masters because it means you can just run the adventure you wanted to run, prepping your game week by week. And all you need to do is slip in some mention every once in a while of whatever element you want to foreshadow, and that's enough for the players to understand that there is a grand plan, even if all the steps along the way are actually just whatever adventure you could come up with. There's actually a great Stephen Moffat quote about this style of storytelling. He ran the show after Russell T Davies left, from seasons 5 through 10, that was Moffat's era, and he had a slightly different style, which, like I said, we'll definitely discuss in another video, so no spoilers here. But looking back on his run, he talked about how these ominous mentions enhance the season-long stories.
When you're writing, how do you balance the short-term plot of the episode with the long-term plot across a series?
Badly. To be honest with you, and I don't think many people are very honest about this, always favor the short-term plot, because that's what people remember and people will love. The long-term plot, if it has to alter to accommodate the short-term plot, just do it. Just do it.
He goes on to talk about how, with some of his seasons, he tried to tell more complex stories that played out over the course of the season, but those complex mythos elements got in the way of just doing fun individual episodes. And I'm sure we'll talk about that when I make my video about Moffat's seasons. I'm sure I'll have lots of hot takes when we get there, but this is the value of this format of foreshadowing, of just using one individual phrase or word. It allows you to hint that something big is coming at the end of the campaign arc, but it also gives you the freedom to not worry about forcing your sessions to conform to some rigid plan for the entire season or arc. Now, I actually think Season 1 of Doctor Who does tell a surprisingly tight story, and I'm actually working on another video about that for my video essay channel. I'll put a link up here when it's done. And nearly every episode of the season does build up to the finale in some way, and we often refer to that as the Bad Wolf season. But if we're honest, none of these individual adventures are about the Bad Wolf storyline, not really. Yes, the writers did a ton of legwork to set up the Season 1 finale. We were introduced to the Daleks in Episode 6, we saw Satellite 5 in Episode 7. The Doctor's major choices in the finale are built up to by other choices we learned about or see him make throughout the season. But none of those individual adventures have anything to do with the phrase Bad Wolf. I think it is an exceptionally strong season of TV, but hypothetically you could have swapped out almost every episode from Season 1 with an episode from Season 2 or 3, and it wouldn't have changed the finale. At least it wouldn't have changed the Bad Wolf element of it. Because the core of the show, week to week, wasn't about the Bad Wolf saga, it was just about doing Doctor Who episodes. Season 2 does very explicitly tell us a lot more about Torchwood right up front. We know there's some sort of division or team that has a gigantic laser, which gets used in the Christmas special. And in Episode 2, we see the founding of Torchwood. But after that, we just hear it mentioned a bunch of times, and it doesn't become a plot point again until the final 2 episodes of the season. In Season 3, the format changes just a bit. The first few episodes play out the exact same way that Torchwood did, like almost beat for beat. Much like Torchwood in the 2005 Christmas special, the 2006 Christmas special has somebody blow up the alien spaceship with a laser gun, and we learn they were directed by Mr. Saxon. And then in the season premiere, we hear somebody say Mr. Saxon was right about the aliens coming to Earth. But then we don't hear about Mr. Saxon again until episodes 6 and 7, and he's actually doing things. We learn things. We don't see him, but we know that he's sponsoring Dr. Lazarus's research. He has an agent who tells Martha's mom about how dangerous the doctor is. His other agents are literally trying to get her mom to bring Martha and the doctor around to the house. They confiscate her cell phone, which doesn't really make sense. Don't they want Martha to get in touch with her? But whatever, it's dramatic and cool. And they ask whether she's voted yet, and so you do have enough to speculate that Mr. Saxon might be a politician or related to politics in some way. And aside from one blinking you miss it clue in the third to last episode where Martha recognizes the Master's voice, that's all we get until the next episode, the two-part finale, where we find out a bunch about Mr. Saxon just in the cold open alone. Season 3 also has the "You Are Not Alone" clue established in episode 3 and paid off in the third to last episode, and you can kind of consider that part of the Saxon foreshadowing, but we as the audience don't realize that's what we're seeing yet. It's basically a separate ominous mention that's only mentioned once, and it's not until later that we find out it's connected, so of course it doesn't have that same effect of repeated mentions of the same phrase. It's less obvious, which kind of defeats the purpose, but it's also very obvious foreshadowing for something else you might have up your sleeve, whether or not it's connected to Mr. Saxon or the Season 3 finale, so I still like it. And Season 4 expands on that approach by giving us a bunch of different ominous mentions throughout the season. In the first episode, Donna references the bees disappearing, and the Doctor hears about a misplaced planet.
I've been employed by the Adiposium First family to foster a new generation after their breeding planet was lost.
What do you mean lost? How'd you lose a planet?
Episode 2 includes another reference to a lost planet, and in both of those episodes, the main plot of the episode happens because of this lost planet in the villain's backstory, which means it has a larger impact on the plot than we usually get. But episode 2 also has a fantastic scene where some fortune tellers hit us with a bunch of prophecies, and that means many more ominous references, all new ones from the last two. The Medusa Cascade, she is returning, there is something on your back. The Doctor mentions the Medusa Cascade a few more times throughout the season, just so the writers can get it in our heads as something relevant. And episodes 3 and 7 feature Donna once again mentioning the bees disappearing. In episode 10, we hear somebody reference another lost planet, the lost moon of Poosh. And in episode 11, we get a payoff for she is returning and there's something on your back, just like how You Are Not Alone got paid off in the final moments of the episode just before the two-part Season 3 finale. But also, once again in episode 11, we get yet another reference to the bees disappearing, as well as foreshadowing for the stars going out. Oh, and I did forget to mention, Rose also comes back, and she also appears throughout the season as a living, breathing, ominous mention. In fact, between her appearances in episodes 1, 5, 10, and 11, and the soothsayer in episode 2 telling us she is returning, Rose is probably the most frequently appearing ominous mention in the entire season. But while the frequency of clues changes per season, the format is always basically the exact same. 13 episodes, which means, in our D&D analogy, 13 sessions. Some of those adventures last across 2 sessions, they're two-parters, but it's still always 13 sessions total. The last 2 are always a two-parter, those are one adventure, and that's where we get the payoff to the story that these ominous mentions are meant to foreshadow. And then the 13th session is the end of this story arc, and so like we've talked about before, you could end the campaign right there, or you could come back and do another self-contained arc for another 13 sessions. And as I've said before, 13 sessions is a fantastic campaign length, at least for a campaign arc, and then you take a break. That's what we used to do back in my home games in college. You just play once a week for a full semester, and then you'd wrap up the story. And 13 weekly sessions, 13 weekly episodes, that's roughly 3 months. 3 months to tell a self-contained story. God, can you imagine getting through a whole campaign story arc in 3 months? I'm lucky if I can find the time to play twice in 3 months. Between running this channel and having a very young child, I just don't have the time. Being an adult is just so much work. If you're a kid, or you're in high school or college, play as much D&D as possible right now. I'm not even kidding. It'll never be that easy again. Of course, the final few installments of this era of Doctor Who followed a very different format. Instead of busting their butts to make 13 episodes and a Christmas special, for that final year they put their energy into just doing 5 specials. And while the next Doctor does kind of, by definition, get the Doctor thinking about his next regeneration and how he might die, the special after that, Planet of the Dead, turns it into explicit foreshadowing with the new ominous mention.
Because your song is ending, sir.
What do you mean?
He will knock 4 times.
And this actually becomes a major plot point in The Waters of Mars and The End of Time. But not just because of foreshadowing, but also because of how the Doctor reacts to it. But more on that in a minute. Because first, I want you to react to some dice from today's sponsor, Only Crits. Ooh. Ah. Nice, nice. Beautiful. Look at that one. Cool. Pretty. Visit onlycrits.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout to save 12% off your order. Thank you so much to Only Crits for sponsoring this video. The thing I like most about the ominous mentions is that they give you the best of both worlds. They give you the freedom to run a flexible campaign that you can just prep from week to week. You don't have to worry about coming up with some elaborate map of how you're going to tie all these adventures together. You just figure out what's the coolest adventure you can give your players next week, and then at some point during the game you try to sneak in the ominous mention in there somewhere, wherever it makes sense, and you have a bit of fun with it. But this method also offers some reassurance to your players that this is all leading somewhere. And in fact, when they hit a certain point in the story, your players will make the connection that this is tied into the ominous mentions you've been seeding throughout the campaign, and they'll realize they must be in the home stretch, and it's almost time for the finale. In Season 1, this comes when the Doctor returns to Satellite 5 and discovers it's run by the Bad Wolf Corporation. He doesn't know what that means just yet, but he knows he's about to get some answers. In Season 2, there are ghosts appearing all over the world, and the Doctor tracks the signal back to Torchwood. In Season 3, they discover that "You Are Not Alone" was referring to the Master, who also turned out to be the true identity of Mr. Saxon. And so now the dramatic question for the last 2 episodes isn't, who is Mr. Saxon, but instead it's, what does he want, and how do we stop him? In one of the last episodes of Season 4, the Doctor literally sees Bad Wolf written on everything again, and realizes Rose is coming back. And then, in the opening moments of the next episode, the Earth is stolen right out from under the TARDIS, directly sending our heroes into an investigation of the stolen planets. And of course, "He will knock 4 times" is a big ol' signal that literally says, when somebody knocks 4 times, that will mean it's the final episode of this story arc.
They said he will knock 4 times, and I think I know what that means, and it doesn't mean right here, right now. Because I don't hear anyone knocking, do you?
The entire point of this method is that the finale can act as a payoff for a long-running storyline, but the audience, in this case the players, won't feel burdened with any expectations of having to remember a bunch of complicated continuity and plot developments from across the campaign.
But at least it gives you something to peg the last episode on. Now we'll find out what all that frequent mentioning was about. If you are depending on people remembering every detail from 6, 7, 8 weeks ago, you're always going to be disappointed.
And in fact, let's talk about how the players can interact with these ominous mentions before the finale arrives. Because for the most part, the beauty of this approach is that your players can decide how much they want to interact with each of these clues. For example, it's not until, once again, episode 11 of Season 1 that anybody actually acknowledges what's been going on so far.
But I've heard that before. Bad Wolf. I've heard that lots of times.
Everywhere we go, 2 words, following us. Bad Wolf.
By that point in the campaign, it would have been frankly ridiculous if the players hadn't noticed the signs. Sometimes, quite literally, the signs. Torchwood was a bit different because in that second episode, the players visit the Torchwood estate, and then they keep hearing the term pop up. But they did miss the context of that second episode where the Queen commissions the Torchwood Institute to become the enemies of the Doctor specifically. They are essentially the antagonists, but there's not a ton of build-up to them. Because when we meet them at the end of the season, they're not really the Doctor's enemy at all. They're government stooges, so he's not exactly thrilled with them, but they're not the mustache-twirling villains of the season. And so they're not foreshadowed like villains, not really. Mr. Saxon, on the other hand, is definitely played as a villain throughout the season. But that's more for the audience, not our characters. Our heroes aren't really there for any of those ominous mentions. They get the "You Are Not Alone" clue, but it's only mentioned once, so it doesn't fit the pattern. Now with Season 4, the missing planets and the bees disappearing and the Medusa Cascade and she is returning and there is something on your back are all ominous mentions for the player characters. But the Rose sightings are meant for us. The Doctor doesn't see them at all. Now with "He will knock 4 times, we only hear it once, but it really sticks with our hero. It rattles him to the point where it starts to change his behavior in the next episode. When he hears knocking, he tries to stop it.
3 knocks is all you're getting.
The downside of this approach is that once your players have picked up on the ominous mention of the campaign arc, there's not really that much for them to interact with.
How can they be following us?
Nah, just a coincidence. Like hearing a word on the radio, then hearing it all day. Never mind.
I think this is a big factor of that Council of Geeks video. If you've already figured out what the clue is, you don't need to keep hearing it repeated. We get it. We know this is the Torchwood season. So either move the story forward in some way whenever you reference it, or just stop referencing it because we get it. Now with Bad Wolf, there is a diegetic reason for it to be repeated. That's part of the story. And Season 3 and 4 have multiple different clues, so they're not beating you over the head with the same one episode after episode. And the turnaround time for knock 4 times is really, really short. It's only a couple of adventures, so I feel that one's probably the least egregious. But if you just did the Bad Wolf method for every campaign arc, it would get pretty tedious, which is, I suspect, why they started varying it up a lot more after the Torchwood arc. They repeated the Bad Wolf approach once with Torchwood, and then they shook up the format a bit with Mr. Saxon and all the clues in Season 4. And here's the tricky thing. If the players take the bait and decide that they do want to dig deeper into one or all of these clues, they can't. Not really. I mean, if they wanted to, maybe they actually could, at least for some of these. If they get suspicious about Torchwood's current day activities or the repeated references to Mr. Saxon, they could go look into those. They could dig into the stories about the bees disappearing or even the missing planets. But if they try to ask about Bad Wolf and try to find out where the names come from, there's not that much they're going to learn. However, I would actually take that as a sign that the players are ready for the plot to move forward, and I tried to introduce the finale right around then. That's kind of what happened in the most recent season of Doctor Who. The Doctor just shows up at unit headquarters and starts asking a government agency to help him figure out the ominous mentions. And at the time, I kind of rolled my eyes at that he just decided to do that because it's the season finale and it's time for him to do that. But in fairness, for the characters themselves, it's kind of the other way around. The player characters took an interest in solving the mystery, which means it's time to introduce the finale, because you can't stretch these mysteries out indefinitely. And setting aside the quality of the most recent season finale, I think this is the right approach for our D&D games. Once the players have started picking up on all the clues, and they start actually trying to figure out what's going on, it's time to start wrapping up the season-long story. You don't want to stretch out the anticipation too long to the point that the road to the finale just gets exhausting. Another potential problem you could run into is that your finale itself could just be unsatisfying. You've hyped it up too much. So that's another reason not to necessarily beat your players over the heads with these references and just cut to the finale before these clues stop becoming intriguing and start getting frustrating. But that's actually a defense of this format, because it forces you to put all your energy into running the best game in the short term as possible, and not focusing on some big, sweeping, long-term storyline.
If you give people months to work out their own ending, they'll always be disappointed by yours. So there's not an awful lot to favour that. I would say the job of television is to favour the story of the week.
Now, is it possible for this format to produce unsatisfying finales? Of course. This is not an issue for me when I watch these early seasons of Doctor Who. I don't think any of these finales are unsatisfying at all. But you know, it can definitely still happen.
It was the wrong anagram.
It's not even an anagram. What are we even doing here? Great season of TV. I genuinely loved most of the episodes. Wasn't really wild about the Beatles episode, but you know what? All the others I thought were fantastic. But that finale, man. That was not good. But you know what? I liked the Christmas special, and I'm optimistic about the new season. I hope it's good. The timing of this video is actually kind of hilarious because right now there's an entire corner of the internet that is currently spiraling out and claiming the show's going to be put on hiatus for another 10 years because it's too woke. And so if you're one of those people and you happen to find my video and you genuinely think Doctor Who is too woke now, I just have to say, you know what? Who am I kidding? I probably lost you the minute you saw the wallpaper. Thanks so much for watching, and let me know in the comments below. Have you ever borrowed this approach to foreshadowing in your own games? Are there any other TV shows that do the same thing, just dropping 1 or 2 word hints about the season finale, but otherwise just doing completely episodic adventures? Because I've been trying to come up with other examples, and I really can't think of any. Hey, Oddwick.
What's up?
I'm trying to think of any other TV shows, or just honestly, any other media in general, where there's not a lot of explicit foreshadowing, but instead the creators keep showing the audience the same thing over and over, and the viewers are just meant to pick up on it and trust the story is leading somewhere. Can you think of any other examples where the creator keeps shoving something into each episode, whether or not it adds anything to the episode at all, and basically just trust the audience to pick up on it and understand that they're clearly going somewhere with it? Can you think of any other examples of that?
Nothing comes to mind.
Yeah, me neither. Thanks for trying, I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
If you can think of any other examples of TV shows that handled foreshadowing in the same way, let me know in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe and sign up for my newsletter. And if you want to see a whole list of other TV shows I'll be talking about throughout the year, check out this video all about my Appendix N. Until next time, play fair and have fun.